Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere quiet. So quiet in fact that the only sound you'll hear for the first few minutes is the low hiss of rice steaming and the occasional yawn of a samurai stretching out morning aches under the soft rise of a peach-coloured sky. You're in feudal Japan, nestled inside the quiet courtyard of a regional estate, and your armour thankfully stays off today. Because this isn't a story of war, this is a story of waiting. Of discipline sharpened in the stillness, of what samurai actually did with all that time between battles, which, spoiler alert, was most of the time. You probably won't survive this lifestyle. It involves far too much bowing self-restraint and voluntary poetry, but you'll get to walk in their sandals for a while. No sword required, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time you're listening. I love seeing where and when the bedtime army gathers. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start your morning the way many samurai did early, stiff and absolutely freezing. The tatami mat beneath you is unforgiving. The room smells faintly of cedarwood ash, and the kimono you slept in, which you've now worn for 3 days straight. That's not laziness, it's tradition. There's no alarm clock. Instead, the estate rooster lets out a sound that might be classified as aggressive encouragement, and you rise, slowly, with the weight of both sleep and centuries of Bushido pressing on your spine. You slide open the shoji screen and step into the outer courtyard. A soft mist hangs above the gravel, and someone's already started the fire in the kitchen. The air tastes like warm rice and charred bamboo. Across the yard, a fellow retainer is performing morning stretches. He's doing something halfway between yoga and intimidating calisthenics. You try to join. Your back audibly protests. Samurai mornings are quiet but deliberate. First you clean yourself, your room, the weapons rack, even if no one's used it since the last lunar eclipse. Cleanliness is next to discipline, after all. Then you eat. Breakfast is simple grilled fish rice, maybe a slice of pickled plum if you're lucky. You eat with practiced silence, nodding occasionally to the other retainers. The head steward enters, scroll in hand, ready to assign duties for the day. But until then, these few minutes are yours. Here's your historical anchor. Samurai were not just warriors, they were servants, officials, and symbols. And contrary to pop culture, they spent far more time not fighting. An average samurai might go years, decades, even without drawing their sword in anger. Peace, oddly enough, was the job, and yet every moment was spent preparing for the day it might not be. This meant rituals, morning habits, bowing to the kamedana, the little household shrine, whispering a mantra as you set your sword still sheathed beside your breakfast. You know, just in case the plum pickle is cursed. Now for the quirky bit. Some samurai households trained their birds to announce the time of day with specific calls. A well-placed miner could chirp, "It's the second hour," of the hare more reliably than any bell. That's how structured things were when your songbird is your secretary. You finish your rice, just as the steward calls your name. Today's assignment, courtyard duty. You'll be sweeping, polishing armour racks, and because it's your turn, replacing the incense at the household shrine. You sigh, bow, and grab the broom. Historians still debate whether this level of ritualized living made samurai more efficient or more tightly wound than an origami crane in a wind tunnel. Some argue that these rhythms gave their lives meaning shaped by discipline. Others say it was just boredom wearing fancy robes. But standing there, brush in hand, watching the sun rise over the tiled roofs of the estate, you get it. The calm, the structure, the unspoken promise that being prepared is its own kind of peace. And as you sweep the gravel into gentle spirals, you feel your thoughts slow. Your shoulders drop. A breeze nudges a pine branch above you. The war can wait. For now, the rice was good. The gravel is neat, and your duty is done. There's something meditative about polishing a katana. You'd think it would be flashy, maybe a spark or a dramatic soundtrack. But no, it's slow. Quiet, almost suspiciously delicate for a weapon designed to cleave people into regrets. You kneel on the wooden porch, the blade resting on a padded cloth, and you begin. First you inspect, not just for rust but for memory. Each scratch is a story. That nick near the hilt from last spring's demonstration for a visiting court official who wanted to see if the cutting through silk mid-air rumour was real. It was. The silk was never the same. You lift the uchiko, your polishing powder ball, and tap it gently along the blade, a dusting of white puffs across the metal. Then with a soft cloth you begin the long slow draw down the length of the katana over and over again until it reflects your face and your favourite doubt back at you. This is not just maintenance, this is ritual. And it's not just for the sword either. It's also for your armour, your bow, your tanto. Even your calligraphy brush gets a cleaning. Because if it carries your name or your handprint, it should shine. Across the courtyard, two younger samurai are working in tandem. One holds a spear steady, while the other oils it with a cloth made from his mother's old kimono. Sentimental, absolutely. But practical too, the cloth is tightly woven and doesn't fray. A third samurai, your friend the one with the hawk-like eyebrows and permanent smirk, leans against a pillar and gossips between buffs of his own blade. "Did you hear about Lord Ito's nephew?" he murmurs. "Got into a duel with a goose." You raise an eyebrow. "Not even a metaphor," he adds. "Feathers everywhere. A complete disgrace." That's the thing. Gossip travels in samurai circles just as swiftly as it does among kitchen staff. Except here, it's served with more dramatic pauses and significantly better posture. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Polishing swords was considered such a specialised art that many samurai sent their blades to professional polishers called togishi, especially for major restorations. But for daily upkeep, you did it yourself, because intimacy with your weapon was seen as part of your character. And now for the quirky addition. In some samurai households, gossip was systematised. Literally, there would be a designated news bearer among the retainers responsible for discreetly delivering updates to keep morale high and tempers low. Think of it like an internal newsletter but whispered during lunch. Historians still argue whether this kind of social maintenance kept samurai mentally balanced or simply added layers of passive-aggressive etiquette to an already complicated caste. Were these whispered conversations about discipline or distraction? You take a break stretching your legs. The sun's higher now, warming the flagstones. Across the way, the steward is having a long, impassioned debate with one of the senior samurai about ceremonial helmet placement. You'd think someone misplaced a sacred scroll, but no, it's about which angle makes the gold crest glint with appropriate gravitas. You pass by a storage shed, catching the scent of old leather and iron. Inside armour rests on wooden stands, like statues frozen mid-conversation. Some are so ornate they look better suited to theatre than war, but that's part of the game. Appearances matter. You pause before your own armour, lightly brushing dust from the shoulder plates. It's not flashy, earth-toned, modest, but it fits well and doesn't squeak, which you count as a blessing. Another samurai walks in, holding his cuirass upside down, muttering about mildew. He sees you and sighs. "It's always the shoulder straps," he says. You nod like a man who knows. Because shoulder straps like rice steam and calligraphy ink are eternal. There's something deeply bonding about this shared rhythm. The unspoken camaraderie of quiet work. You may never raise a sword together in actual battle, but here, in the subtle clinks of buckles and clatter of cloth-wrapped blades, you're already a team. And as you step back into the sunlight, stretching once more before the next assignment, you realise these are the moments that hold the samurai world together. Not the glory, not the combat, but the maintenance. Of weapons, of tradition, of friendships. Even if some of those friendships hinge entirely on shared disdain for helmet polish. You hear it before you see it, the taut twang of a bowstring, followed by a dull thump as the arrow meets its mark, probably. Then silence. Then another twang. You follow the sound around the corner of the estate, past a small pond where koi circle, like they've got nothing better to do, and into the open practice field. There they are. Two samurai, one kneeling, one standing, both facing a straw target shaped vaguely, like a man who once insulted someone's sword technique and lived to regret it. The arrows are long-feathered, elegant, and the movement slow, almost exaggerated, like they're acting in a dream no one else can see. You quietly take your place in line. No one speaks here. Not because of formality, well okay, mostly because of formality, but also because this is Kyudo, the way of the bow, and apparently speaking ruins the vibes. Your fingers are still sore from sword maintenance, but this is a different kind of strain. You lift the Yumi taller than you asymmetrical beautiful and knock an arrow. Deep breath in, hold, focus on the target. But you're not just aiming for the straw man, you're aiming for harmony. Your instructor once told you, if the arrow reaches the target, good. But if the self reaches stillness, better. You didn't understand it then. You kind of don't understand it now, but you nod anyway, like a student of great wisdom and moderate confusion. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Kyudo evolved from practical warfare archery into a refined martial art during the Edo period. It became less about hitting the enemy and more about hitting the essence of being. Samurai would spend hours perfecting posture, breath, and draw sometimes even blindfolded to emphasize feel over sight. Your first arrow misses, the second grazes the edge, the third lands cleanly, and you feel it in your spine before you hear it. A tiny perfect thunk and the faintest breeze across your cheek. You step back, bowing politely to the target. Yes, even the target gets a bow. Nearby, your friend from earlier sits cross-legged, scribbling something in a notebook. You peek over. Haiku, of course. Do arrows dream too? He reads aloud, proud of the line. You offer a thumbs up. Not exactly traditional, but appreciated. Now, the quirky bit. Some samurai believed that arrows carried the breath of the archer. A lucky arrow used in battle or ritual might be passed down like a family heirloom. Others were burned after use returned to the heavens, like a spent prayer. One clan even swore by using red-dyed feathers, claiming it frightened demons and enemies with fashion sense. Historians still argue whether the spiritual emphasis on archery made samurai better warriors or simply more poetic ones. Was it training or theatrical therapy? You step aside as a much older retainer steps up. His draw is slow trembling, but when he releases the arrow, sails in a smooth arc and lands perfectly in the centre of the target. No one claps, that would be uncivilized. But everyone notices. After practice, you retreat to the shade beneath a cherry tree, your bow across your lap, your fingers tingling. The wind rustles the grass, a cricket chirps. Somewhere, someone's sandals slap against the stone as they run an errand too urgent for your current state of profound stillness. You think about your earlier shots. Not great, but not terrible. And besides, maybe the point isn't the target. Maybe it's the breath, the draw, the pause before the release. Maybe, as your instructor says, you'll understand in about 20 years. Or maybe you just really needed to hit that straw man today. Either way, the bow is now back in its case, the arrow's returned, and your body, surprisingly, at peace. And isn't that the point? You return from the archery range, expecting a bit of rest, maybe a quiet bowl of barley tea, a small nap, a passive-aggressive stare-off with Chairman Spitz. But instead the steward flags you down and points to a side room. Calligraphy duty, he says, handing you a brush like it's both an honour and a subtle punishment. You bow, sigh inwardly, and enter the writing room. The room smells like ink and nerves. Small pots of sumi ink rest on lacquered trays, and several brushes stand like soldiers in a ceramic cup. Sunlight streams through the paper screen, casting your workspace in that gentle, flattering light that makes everyone's handwriting look 3% more competent. You sit, stretch your fingers, and begin. First, you grind the ink stick on the stone. Slow circular motions. You add a few drops of water. It's almost like cooking if the soup in question stains everything it touches and judges you silently. The brush feels strange after the bow, softer, requiring more finesse than force. Your assignment today: copy a passage from the Book of Five Rings, a classic treatise on swordsmanship strategy and strangely poetic life advice. Your first strokes are shaky. The second line runs uphill like a tipsy goat. But by the third, your hand steadies. The motion becomes familiar, predictable, and oddly peaceful. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Samurai were expected to be literate, not just in reading orders or writing reports, but in copying classical texts, composing poetry, and maintaining elegant handwriting. Calligraphy was a reflection of discipline and mind. A messy hand implied a messy soul. Your fellow scribe sits nearby, humming a song that might be about rice or heartbreak. Maybe both. He leans over once to look at your paper nods and mutters, "Your radicals are a little stiff." You nod back silently, promising to radical better next time. Then, with perfect timing, someone drops an ink pot in the hallway. The steward yells. The brushmaster sighs, and everyone pretends nothing happened because starting over would be worse than death, or worse than explaining what happened to a superior with extremely high expectations and very low eyebrows. Now, for your fringe tidbits, some samurai practiced what's called ink dueling. Not a literal battle, but a competition where two retainers would compose opposing scrolls on the same subject: poetry, wisdom, even passive-aggressive commentary on castle budgeting, and the lord would judge the victor based on elegance, sharpness, and implied insult. One samurai reportedly won with the line, "Even plum blossoms wilt near your math." Historians still argue whether calligraphy enhanced martial skill or was simply a way to keep ambitious warriors too busy to start trouble. Was it spiritual practice or upper-class busy work? You pause, flex your wrist and shift your weight. The brush dance is easier now. The words curve and glide across the parchment like they've waited all morning to be freed. Outside, the wind shakes a wind chime shaped like a turtle. Inside, the only sound is ink meeting paper over and over, as if the brush itself is breathing. You finish your passage and place the paper to dry. Another samurai leans in and offers you a sweet mochi filled with red bean paste, the polite bribe of exhausted scribes. You accept, chewing thoughtfully, then return the favour with your last pickled plum. There's a quiet camaraderie here, where every character is a step toward self-mastery. No swords, no shouting, just soft brushwork and the slow unravelling of your thoughts onto paper. You write a final line not assigned, just yours. A mind sharpened by ink is harder to dull. You don't sign it, that would be bragging, but you leave it in the open just in case someone thinks it's profound. Or at least better than that time you accidentally inked a proverb upside down. You think you've earned a break by now. After archery, after calligraphy, after bowing so much, your spine deserves its own retainer. But no, the steward appears again with the faintly amused expression of someone who has scheduled your relaxation for you. He leads you down a covered walkway, past the koi pond again, still circling, still suspicious, and into a small structure with paper walls and a thatched roof. Inside, a tea room. The floor is immaculately swept. Tatami mats cushion each step. A low table sits near the far end, beside a charcoal hearth where water steams in a cast iron kettle. Your host kneels quietly, adjusting a lacquered tea bowl with the reverence usually reserved for newborns or ancestral swords. Ah, so it's that kind of tea ceremony. You bow. They bow lower. You bow lower still. This continues for a bit longer than medically necessary. Finally, you kneel, hands on thighs, and settle into the delicate rhythm of the chanoyu, the way of tea. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Tea ceremonies in samurai culture weren't just about refreshment. They were about precision, patience, and social signalling. Every gesture was deliberate, from folding the cloth used to clean the bowl to how one held the cup, rotating it slightly before sipping so the decorated side faced outward. Tea wasn't a beverage, it was a conversation with no words. The host ladles hot water into the matcha powder and begins to whisk. The sound is soothing, like wind through reeds, or a monk brushing sand into spirals. You watch the froth rise slowly, perfectly, and feel yourself inhale without realizing. And then, just as the first bowl is passed to you, someone sneezes outside. No one reacts. Not the host, not the assistant, not you. The sneeze is ignored, politely banished from the realm of reality. You take the bowl with two hands. You bow, you sip. It's grassy, slightly bitter, comforting in a way that defies language. There's a reason this is still practiced centuries later. Now the quirky tidbit. Some samurai use tea ceremonies as informal strategy meetings. A lord might host an opponent for tea just to gauge his mannerisms, look for signs of doubt, or gently drop metaphors disguised as compliments. One famous general allegedly sealed an alliance by serving a rival tea in a bowl, painted with bamboo, symbolising strength and flexibility. Subtle extremely, effective clearly. Historians still argue whether tea culture softened samurai demeanour or gave them an outlet to wage psychological warfare in miniature. Was it serenity or a silent battle of facial expressions? You glance across the table. Your fellow guest lifts their bowl with perfect posture, eyes lowered, but their pinky twitches slightly before the first sip. Nervous, disrespectful indigestion. The host begins to fold the cleaning cloth fukusa with slow, reverent movements. You find yourself hypnotized. This isn't just cleaning, it's choreography. The cloth becomes a dancer, the host, the choreographer, and the tea bowl the audience of one. When the ceremony ends, you rise with the grace of someone pretending their legs haven't fallen asleep. You thank the host with a bow, so deep your nose nearly brushes the mat. They smile, nod, and vanish behind the paper door, like a stage magician exiting a particularly quiet show. Outside, the air feels warmer, lighter. The tension you didn't know you were carrying has evaporated with the steam. You sit beneath a pine tree and reflect. That wasn't just tea, that was a pause, a full stop in the sentence of the day. And in that pause, something shifted. You're calmer, more centered. Still a little hungry, though. You pull a rice ball from your sleeve. Not traditional, not approved, but satisfying. And as you take that first bite, you feel it, that brief golden flicker of peace that only comes when the world is quiet, the tea is gone, and no one's expecting you to polish anything for at least another hour. The sky has changed colour again. That pale afternoon haze that makes shadows softer sounds gentler. You stretch your legs along a stone path behind the main hall, letting your fingers trail across the mossy edge of a carved basin. It's time for something lighter, not spiritual, not martial, not dripping with etiquette. It's time for board games. You duck into a shaded courtyard where two older samurai are seated on either side of a square wooden table, eyeing a grid lined with black and white stones. Go. The board is minimal, but the tension, heavy, monumental, glacial. You bow politely and settle nearby watching. The elder with the wispy moustache places a stone with the careful finality of someone signing a treaty. His opponent squints, scratches his neck and mutters, "You always do this." The moustache man raises an eyebrow, smug. The game continues. Here's your mainstream historical fact board games, like Go and Shogi, were common pastimes among the samurai class. Go in particular was prized not just for strategy, but for the way it mirrored military thinking territory. Balance, sacrifice, encirclement. Lords even employed tutors to improve their game, believing it honed the same instincts that decided battles. You're invited to play the next round. You bow twice because now it's habit, and take your place on the cushion. The board feels serious. You try not to make an obvious first move, but within 5 turns you've overextended, your stone surrendered half the board and been politely, thoroughly dismantled. It's not defeat, the moustache man says kindly, it's educational collapse. Your friend joins and opens a small lacquered box filled with carved game pieces, shogi, the Japanese cousin to chess. But unlike Western chess, captured pieces can switch sides. Betrayal is not just allowed, it's expected, which is fair considering the history of samurai politics. You play around and lose badly. The board stares back at you full of treacherous knights and mocking pawns. You vow revenge, or at least a rematch. Now for the quirky bits. Some samurai were notorious sore losers. One 16th century general reportedly flipped the go board after losing a game during a rainstorm, declaring the weather biased. Another, after a defeat in shogi, wrote a poem lamenting how even the wooden horse galloped from me. Historians still argue whether these games were truly about leisure or covert rehearsal for the power games of court and clan. Were they entertainment or soft diplomacy? You wander over to another group who've abandoned boards entirely and are juggling. 3 samurai passing small leather balls between them in perfect rhythm, each with the expression of someone calculating orbital mechanics and rice taxation simultaneously. You try, you fail. One ball hits your forehead, another rolls under a bench. The third is caught mid-air by a child who's definitely not supposed to be here, but bows anyway, before fleeing like a successful bandit. It's a different kind of training, this. Not about skill with weapons or the elegance of tea, but the art of not taking yourself too seriously. You need that sometimes, especially in a world of lacquered armour and impossible expectations. As the sun dips lower, the courtyard fills with laughter. Someone breaks out a shamisen and plucks a tune that's almost rude in its cheerfulness. A younger samurai dances badly on purpose. He's rewarded with applause and a shoe. You lean back, arms behind your head, watching clouds stretch over the rooflines like lazy ghosts. The wind smells of cypress and charcoal and a hint of mischief. You haven't fought today, haven't drawn steel, but somehow you feel sharpened all the same. Because this is part of the life too, the downtime, the play, the careful chaos of a board game or a juggling lesson gone wrong. It's not always about battle, sometimes it's about balance. Even if that balance is briefly interrupted by a ghost stone bouncing off your sandal. The breeze has picked up. It carries the faint rustle of bamboo and the distant thump of a wooden pestle pounding rice into something stickier than social obligation. You follow the sound through the estate until you reach the garden, more than a garden really. A sprawling slice of deliberate nature framed by wooden bridges, stone lanterns, and a pond that seems to think it's deeper than it is. Today, you're assigned to garden duty. And before you groan, let's remember you're a samurai. Even your landscaping is probably steeped in philosophy. A retainer hands you a rake with ceremonial gravity. Another gestures toward the gravel courtyard. Ah yes, Karasansui, the dry landscape garden. Raked stone, carefully placed rocks, moss that's treated better than most minor nobility. Here's your mainstream historical fact: samurai gardens weren't just decorative. They were designed as meditative spaces, reflections of inner order, discipline, and cosmic balance. Raking patterns in gravel symbolized flowing water, and each rock represented islands, mountains, or thoughts too heavy to say out loud. You begin slowly drawing long, curving lines in the gravel. It's harder than it looks. The rake drags, your lines wobble. You step back, correct, try again. By the third attempt, something clicks. It's not about perfection, it's about presence. You focus on the curve, the drag, the pause. One breath, one motion, one deliberate scratch in the fabric of the universe. You are the rake, you are the gravel, you are weight someone's sandals, just messed up your wave pattern. You glare, they bow, you nod, all is forgiven, but only because your pattern now looks like a very stylish tsunami. Near the pond, another group tends to irises and lotus blossoms. A senior samurai is pruning a plum tree like he's negotiating a treaty. He doesn't look up, even when a bird lands on his shoulder. They're clearly old friends. Now for your fringe tidbit: some samurai took plant symbolism so seriously they composed poems based on garden arrangements. One particularly poetic warrior arranged pebbles to form the kanji for stillness, then surrounded it with withered grass to represent fleeting time. He submitted it as an essay. No one dared critique it. Historians still argue whether gardening helped maintain inner peace, or just gave lords something to micromanage when wars were slow. Was it cultivation, or quiet power projection? You finish your gravel path and step back. It's abstract, bold, possibly avant-garde, but it feels right. Then of course a cat appears. It walks directly through the lines, pauses in the centre, and stares at you like an emperor awaiting tribute. You bow. The cat leaves. You bow again for good measure. Elsewhere in the garden you spot a stone basin trickling water. Nearby a bamboo fountain slowly fills tips with a satisfying clack and resets. Over and over. It's a rhythm, a metronome for your thoughts. You sit by it, not because you have to, but because the sound is oddly perfect. A gardener walks past carrying a basket of leaves and a half-written poem. You trade a nod, no words. The wind speaks enough. Later, you're given the task of sweeping fallen leaves off a path. A simple job, but the steward reminds you sweep with intent. As though each leaf is a visitor, each stroke a farewell. You try. One stroke, two. A pattern emerges. Then the wind undoes your work. You sigh, sweep again. The sun warms your back. Somewhere in the kitchen wing, a pot simmers. The air smells of miso pine and slightly scorched rice. You keep sweeping. Because even in a warrior's world, sometimes the greatest discipline is in the rake, not the sword. And the garden doesn't care who you are, only that you're paying attention. The sun tilts westward now, casting longer shadows across the courtyard. It's that golden hour where everything looks more cinematic than it really is, including you dusted with gravel sleeves, rolled slightly windblown. Like a very introspective extra in a samurai epic. You're just about to sneak off for a snack when you're summoned again. This time, it's for something different, something musical. You're guided to a side room with sliding doors painted with cranes and pine trees. Inside, several instruments rest on stands, a koto stretched low across the floor, a shamisen propped upright, and a shakuhachi flute that seems to hum quietly, even in stillness. Today's downtime music practice. Now, you might not consider yourself musically gifted. You once tried to hum a battle hymn and ended up with what sounded like a lullaby for lost sheep. But that's not the point. Here's your mainstream historical facts. Many samurai were trained in music, particularly in the late Edo period. Musical education wasn't just for courtiers or monks. It became a marker of cultural refinement. Instruments like the koto and shakuhachi were favoured for their meditative tones and associations with discipline, elegance and subtle emotion. You're assigned to the koto, the long-stringed instrument that looks equal parts harp and architectural sketch. A tutor kneels beside you, nods solemnly, and plucks a few strings, sharp, beautiful notes that ripple like a stream across polished stones. Then it's your turn. You pluck one string. It twangs like a confused banjo. You both pause. The tutor doesn't flinch. Again they say gently. You do? And again. Each time the sound improves slightly. You find a rhythm. You lose it. You find it again. Music, it seems, isn't about perfection. It's about presence, much like everything else around here. Elsewhere in the room, another samurai attempts the shakuhachi flute. The sound is breathy, haunting, like wind moving through hollow bamboo, or perhaps like a ghost sighing dramatically. Either way, it fits the vibe. Now, for your quirky tidbit, the shakuhachi was famously used by the Komuso wandering monks, who wore woven baskets over their heads and used the flute both as meditation and as a spiritual weapon. According to rumour, some of these monks were actually spies, meaning their flute music might have doubled as coded communication. Imagine eavesdropping on espionage disguised as jazz. Historians still argue whether samurai music was sincere artistic expression or a carefully cultivated performance to appear cultured in court settings. Were they musicians or strategic aesthetes? You start to enjoy the sound of the koto. It vibrates through the floor into your bones until you feel less like a warrior and more like a wave on a quiet shore. One samurai plays a song about pine trees and lost love. Another joins on shamisen, adding a rhythm that mimics hoofbeats. A third hums along quietly, off-key, and no one corrects him. Because here, it's not about the music, it's about the moment. You try again. This time your fingers pluck out a tiny phrase, simple, clumsy, but yours. The tutor nods once. That's enough. Later, as the session ends, the instruments are cleaned and covered with cloth. You help roll the koto strings gently into their case, careful not to disturb the memory of what they played. Outside, the wind has shifted. A storm might be coming, or maybe just a long, thoughtful evening. You carry the music with you as you go, not in notes, in silence, because now you understand why the samurai learned to play. Not for applause, but for the echo it leaves behind. There's a stillness to twilight that feels older than the trees around you. The estate quiets down, not in exhaustion, but in expectation. Somewhere in the distance, a bell chimes softly, once then twice. This time, you aren't summoned by anyone. You're simply drawn by the sound. You follow it through a bamboo grove and toward a side gate that opens to a forested trail. A narrow path curls upward into the hills, lit now by the last amber streaks of sunlight. You walk slowly, unsure if you're meant to, but no one stops you. This part of samurai downtime, a solitary walk. No armour, no weapons, no duties. Just the road, the air, and the faint rustle of wind in the leaves. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Samurai were not only expected to excel in warfare and refinement, but also encouraged to practice kansho, the art of contemplative walking or solitary reflection in nature. These quiet moments were meant to balance the harshness of duty with internal stillness, often inspired by Zen teachings. Your feet crunch on pebbles. A frog plops into a stream nearby. The path veers beside a small shrine, its wooden beams wrapped in paper prayers. You pause. Someone's left a folded poem in the offering box, written, it seems, on repurposed rice paper. It reads, "The pine leans westward, like the old man who bows low to the setting sun." You nod, folding the thought into your own. The wind smells of cedar and faint smoke. Above, cranes cut across the darkening sky like strokes from a calligraphy brush, silent, perfect, gone. You come to a bench, a moss-covered plank, beneath a ginkgo tree, and sit. The world slows around you. It's not meditation exactly, but something close, something less structured, more human. Now, the fringe tidbit. Some samurai left records of their solitary walks, not in journals, but in coded landscape drawings. A bent tree might represent a moral dilemma. A fork in the path could mean political indecision. A shaded rock might mark grief. They didn't just walk the land, they used it as a canvas for the things they couldn't say aloud. Historians still argue whether these personal practices had a measurable influence on strategy or morale. Did silent reflection lead to clearer judgment in battle, or was it merely spiritual maintenance in a life balanced on ritual and blood? You rise again, stretching stiff knees. The path loops back, winding you past a trickling spring and a grove of wind-sculpted pine. You spot an abandoned inkstone on a stump, forgotten or offered. You don't touch it. Some things are left in place for a reason. The estate glimmers below lanterns, flickering like constellations. You descend slowly, tracing the same steps as thousands before you. Near the bottom of the hill, you spot someone else walking, a figure, in russet robes, moving without haste. You trade nods in passing, not breaking the quiet. The courtyard is nearly empty when you return. A few servants clean up the last of the day's dishes. Someone sweeps. Chairman Spitz is nowhere to be seen, which is both relieving and deeply suspicious. You pass the koi pond again. The fish blink up at you, judging your posture. You straighten your back just in case, and then you slip back into your room, a quiet corner framed by paper walls and a bamboo mat. There's tea waiting, cold now but still fragrant. A folded blanket, a single candle, and just outside the gentle tap of wind against the shutters. It's not much, but it's enough. You didn't duel today, didn't recite any creeds, didn't carve your name into history, but somehow in walking, slow breathing deep and listening to the hush between footsteps, you feel closer to whatever it is the samurai were really guarding. Not honor, not titles, stillness. The candlelight flickers as you stretch out on your mat, half wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of cedar and starch. The estate has hushed into its final rhythm. Lanterns, dimmed voices, reduced to whispers. The occasional bark of a dog that seems too sleepy to commit. But your night isn't over yet, because tonight, you've been invited to the archive. You blink at the invitation. Not many get to enter the inner library, fewer still after sunset, but someone must think you're trustworthy, or perhaps they're just in need of help sorting scrolls. Either way, you slip your feet into sandals, adjust your robes, and follow the paper lantern left on your doorstep. The archive lies behind a discreet sliding door, its wood darker than the rest, polished smooth from centuries of quiet hands. Inside, it's cooler. The smell of old ink, mulberry paper and binding glue welcomes you like a scholarly ghost. And there, lit by 2 steady oil lamps, is the archive master. A woman older than most statues, her hair braided with ribbon, her gaze as sharp as a hawk's, and just as unblinking. She doesn't greet you so much as nod at a stack of documents. You bow, she points, you begin. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Samurai households, especially those of higher rank, often maintained extensive personal libraries. These archives included not just military manuals and land records, but poetry collections, philosophical treatises, coded family letters, and even travel logs. Literacy rates among the samurai class were unusually high, especially during the peaceful Edo period, when martial arts gave partial way to bureaucratic refinement. You sort through scrolls, some sealed with string, others edged in gold ink. One contains a record of rainfall over 30 years. Another, an inventory of arrowheads. Another, still a love poem disguised as a recipe for pickled radish. The archive master chuckles when she sees your confusion. 2 kinds of hunger, she says, and then goes back to cataloguing. Now for your fringe tidbit. There are rumours that samurai libraries occasionally hid forbidden texts, books banned by shoguns, for promoting foreign ideas or questioning lineage. Some were encoded, others were bound into decoy covers, like hiding a radical treaty inside a guide to fishing knots. Information, after all, was as dangerous as a blade and often harder to trace. Historians still argue whether samurai archives were strictly administrative or served as a kind of intellectual armoury. Were these shelves just ledgers or defences against ignorance hidden behind paper walls? You find a scroll with odd illustrations, creatures, part lion, part wind, breathing spirals instead of flame. Notes on dream visions, it says in the margin. You wonder what kind of mind thought that worth saving. You keep working, the stack thins, the silence deepens. The archive master finally hands you a tray, 2 cups of roasted barley tea, and a dish of candied plums. You sip slowly. The tea is bitter, the plums too sweet. Together, perfect. Balance, she says, as if reading your thoughts. A final scroll is placed before you. You're told to copy it carefully, ink and brush, no smudging. It's a short meditation on wind, how it moves around obstacles, how it teaches patience, how it forgets nothing. You copy it stroke by stroke. You don't rush. There's no reward for speed here. Each character is a breath, each line a moment. When you're done, the master examines your work and places it in a fresh case. You've added to the archive, she says. You don't know what to say, so you bow. Outside, the moon has climbed high, round and quiet. The path back to your room glows faintly silver. Crickets sing. Bamboo clacks in the breeze. You walk slower than usual, scroll still warm in your hands. Because tonight your sword stayed sheathed, your voice stayed soft, and yet somehow you feel sharper. The next morning arrives with a surprising gift-free time. Not the scheduled kind. Not a cleverly disguised assignment. Actual no one is watching, do what you want time. So naturally you panic. What do you want? You've gardened, you've raked, you've played instruments, recited poems, even sorted scrolls, until your dreams were indexed by subject. But this time, there's no expectation. Which means there's only one place to go, the town, outside the gates. You change into something less formal, still samurai, but more trying not to draw attention, and less please bow every 10 steps. Chairman Spitz watches you from under a tree with deep suspicion. You toss him a leftover rice ball and head down the path. The town is already alive. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Edo period, especially towns surrounding samurai estates or castles became bustling commercial hubs. While samurai were a class above merchants, many depended on these towns for daily needs, cultural exchange, and occasionally just a bit of gossip. You start at the tea house. It's run by a woman who greets you with the sort of bow that says she's seen 1,000 warriors and isn't impressed by any of them. You like her immediately. You order mochi and sweet bean paste along with a cup of green tea, so strong it might classify as a weapon. You sit near the window, watching people go by. Peasants with baskets, merchants counting coins, a monk scolding a goat for knocking over a prayer stand. Life unpolished and oddly comforting. Next, the bookstore. Not large, but filled with hand-copied volumes and scraps of paper with half-finished poems. The owner is an elderly man who speaks only in haiku unless it's about taxes. You find a small booklet, illustrations of mythical creatures said to live in the mountains beyond the border. One is a fish with legs, another a fox that mimics human speech. There's no explanation. You buy it instantly. Now, for your fringe tidbit, some samurai, especially those on long assignments, far from caught anonymously, published books under pen names, everything from strategy guides to illustrated joke scrolls. One notorious warrior wrote a series of satirical poems mocking other clans' fashion choices. He was never caught, but his style of insults became legendary. Historians still argue whether the line between warrior and artist was genuinely blurred, or simply a survival mechanism in long stretches between battles. Were samurai born multi-talented, or did peace force creativity out of necessity? You step into a shop selling incense and ink. The smell is dizzying in a good way. The merchant offers you a deal on writing smoke, a blend of sandalwood and camphor, supposedly used by poets to summon metaphors. You buy a stick just in case. Outside, you pause by a well and watch children float flower petals in the water. One offers you a marigold. You accept with the seriousness it deserves. You've got a few coins left, so of course you find the puppet stand. A travelling troupe is performing no voices, just music and string. The puppets are exquisitely carved, moving with grace that makes you forget the hands guiding them. Today's tale. A young warrior who loses his sword but gains a bell that only rings in the presence of truth. You watch to the end. It's a little melodramatic, but then again so is your whole career. As the sun dips, you begin the walk back to the estate. Your pockets are full of strange purchases. Your mind buzzes with market noise and puppet movements. But underneath it all is a quiet satisfaction. Because sometimes the best kind of samurai discipline is knowing when to take a day off. You return to the estate with dusty sandals, a small ink stain on your sleeve, and the distinct satisfaction of having done absolutely nothing productive by official standards. Perfect. But before you can disappear into your room, a messenger intercepts you. No words, just a polite bow and a folded slip of parchment. Tonight's schedule has changed. You're invited to the garden for a tsukimi moon viewing. You try to look appropriately honoured, and not like someone who was planning to fall asleep in their clothes. Moon viewing was never on your agenda, and yet here you are, freshly washed hair tied back, walking toward the outer garden, where low lanterns bob along the stone paths like quiet fireflies. The air is cool, the hush is expectant. Somewhere in the shadows, a flute begins to play soft hesitant, like someone warming up to a memory. Here's your mainstream historical fact: tsukimi, or moon viewing, was a deeply cherished seasonal tradition among the Japanese aristocracy and warrior classes. It combined poetry, contemplation, and aesthetics into one elegant ritual often held in autumn, when the full moon was considered especially beautiful and spiritually significant. You arrive to find a dozen others already seated on woven mats, arranged around a low lacquered table. Small plates of seasonal sweets, chestnut cakes, rice dumplings, and slices of persimmon have been placed with mathematical precision. Tea is being poured in cups so delicate they might collapse under a harsh glance. No one speaks loudly. Conversation is a murmur. The focus is skyward. You sit, you sip, you wait. And then the moon clears the ridge. It's enormous. Pale gold, round and near enough to touch if you stretch just a bit. It catches in the water of the koi pond, turns every leaf silver, and softens the very air. One by one poems are offered, not recited with flourish, simply spoken, sometimes haltingly, sometimes in whispers. One samurai compares the moon to a blade, another to a lost lover's gaze. A third simply says, "It reminds me to breathe." You don't speak at all. You watch the way the wind stirs the grasses, how the candle flames bow slightly westward. You think about silence and how here it says more than noise ever could. Now, your fringe tidbit. Some tsukimi gatherings included moon-themed games like balancing dumplings in a spoon, while walking backward or composing haiku from lines drawn at random from a pouch. One famous record describes a samurai so determined to win the haiku challenge that he stayed up 3 nights rewriting the same poem until it became unintelligible. He won anyway, likely due to sympathy. Historians still argue whether moon viewing among samurai was genuine spiritual practice or simply another layer of social performance. Was it about honouring the season or about appearing refined to your lord? You lean back on your elbows and let your gaze go soft. The moonlight soaks into your sleeves. The sweets dissolve on your tongue. Time slows. Someone next to you sighs, not in boredom but in quiet contentment. And you think this too is part of the code. Not battle, not duty, just bearing witness. To beauty, to stillness, to the sky doing its quiet work. The evening ends without ceremony. People drift away in ones and twos. The music stops. The last of the tea is poured. You rise. You walk slowly back through the garden past shadows that now feel gentler. Somewhere a cricket chirps. A breeze lifts your sleeve. You feel no urge to speak. The moon follows you home. The next morning greets you with a familiar sound wood meeting flesh, followed by a polite grunt and a flurry of muttered curses. Yes, it's sparring day. You stretch your arms, already predicting the future bruises. The air smells of rice porridge and linseed oil, the universal scent of a dojo at dawn. As you step into the training yard, you spot the others already warming up, rolling their shoulders, adjusting shin guards, making the kinds of faces that say, "I should have stretched more yesterday." And there lined up in respectful rows are the bokken wooden practice swords, solid, unassuming, and just heavy enough to make you regret every choice that brought you here. Today's downtime friendly combat. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During peacetime, samurai continued training with wooden swords in structured sparring matches. These weren't just drills, they were psychological conditioning, teaching restraint, focus, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Matches were often supervised by senior warriors or teachers, ensuring no one accidentally tried to win too hard. You pick your bokken balanced worn at the grip, nicked near the tip, a veteran's blade, or at least a well-loved stick. Your opponent is already in place, a fellow traveller. You've shared poems, meals, and awkward silences. Now you'll trade measured blows. The match begins with a bow, low, steady, sincere. And then movement. It's not a brawl, not a flailing duel. It's a conversation, wood tapping wood feet, sliding across packed earth, breath-matching rhythm. You miss your first strike, you block the second, you adjust, they pivot. It becomes less about landing hits and more about reading each other's timing. You're sweating by the third exchange. Now for the quirky tidbit. In some dojos, the loser of a match had to compose an apology haiku to the winner. Not for losing, but for interrupting the flow of the session. A particularly bad match might result in 2 poems, one for poor footwork, another for sweating on the mat. Historians still argue whether these sparring sessions were practical or performative. Were samurai genuinely honing skill, or were they preserving ritual rehearsing roles like actors in a play of controlled violence? You take a hit to the side, not hard but loud. Everyone hears it. You wince, your opponent bows again, and you both reset. The next round goes better. You begin to feel the rhythm, not of winning, but of presence. The match ends not with applause, but a respectful nod. No score, no winner, just breath and memory. Afterward, there's tea. Everyone sits on the veranda, bruised and buzzing. One man unwraps a rice ball and discovers it's mostly mustard. No one knows who did it. Everyone suspects the quiet poet in the corner. You soak your hands in a basin of cool water. Your fingers are already stiff. Tomorrow will be sore. But this too is part of samurai life. Not glory, not duels at dawn, just discipline, shared effort, the dignity of sweat spent in pursuit of balance. You glance down at your bokken resting beside your sandals. It's not much to look at, but it's enough to teach you something. About timing, about patience, and maybe about yourself. Later that day, as your bruises settle into their usual chorus of complaints, you find yourself summoned not to train, not to spar, but to assist with the most curious task. Inventory. Yes, samurai downtime sometimes includes spreadsheets, the parchment version. You're led to a side building near the granary, where crates, jars and bundles are being sorted by a man who looks like he hasn't slept since the last dynasty. He's a quartermaster, respected, feared, and always one scroll away from snapping. He hands you a brush and a ledger, and gestures to a stack of sealed bundles. Count, weigh, describe. Simple. Deceptively simple. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Samurai estates and garrisons maintained meticulous records of supplies, rice rations, arrow counts, horse feed, lantern oil. Precision wasn't just about control, it was survival. A miscounted store of grain could mean starvation in winter. A forgotten spearhead could tip the balance in a skirmish. Bureaucracy for the samurai was deadly serious. You begin your task, 1 jar of pickled daikon weight slightly off. 1 bundle of fletched arrows, 3 tips missing. 1 mysterious crate labelled only miscellaneous textiles, which turns out to contain ceremonial headbands and a rubbery thing that might once have been a turnip. And then you hit the scroll shelf. These are less practical and more interpretive. 1 scroll details the best knot for tying kimono sashes during monsoon season. Another contains a record of every time the estate cat was seen, sleeping in the Lord's shoes, 47 times, if you're wondering. A third is titled Unreliable, accounts of reliable horses, and seems to be part diary, part accusation. You pause, you flip pages, you laugh. Now for your fringe tidbit. Some samurai households maintain joke ledgers alongside their official ones. These might list ghost repellent, 2 jars excuses for tardiness, 11 entries or potential haiku topics, 42 suggestions mostly weather-based. These weren't necessarily frivolous, they were morale boosters, pressure valves in a life dominated by restraint. Historians still argue whether these documents were tolerated indulgences or quiet rebellions. Were they winked at by lords or hidden beneath floorboards and shared only during full moons? You finish the scroll stack and help haul a few sacks of rice to the storeroom. It's backbreaking work, not glamorous, not poetic, just honest effort that reminds you why samurai robes are deceptively breathable. As evening falls, the quartermaster calls it. You hand in your ledger, your brushwork a little shaky, but your math impeccable. He grunts in approval and hands you a reward, a small packet of dried persimmons. You did well, he says, like it pains him to admit it. You bow deeply, then trip over a broom and nearly take out the oil lamp. He says nothing, but you feel his judgment through the soles of your feet. Back in your room, you nibble a persimmon and reread a poem you copied days ago. The ink has faded slightly. The sentiment hasn't. You sit in the quiet, your body tired in the best way. Not from sparring, not from strategy, but from helping keep the bones of the estate intact. Because sometimes samurai glory isn't found in a duel, it's hiding in a ledger entry. One carefully written brushstroke at a time. Tonight the lanterns burn lower than usual. Their soft golden light pulls across the stone paths like liquid amber, quieting the edges of everything they touch. The estate feels slower, more folded in on itself, like even the walls are breathing a little softer. You wander outside with no particular purpose, just a walk to stretch out the stiffness of the day. Chairman Spitz follows at a distance, crunching a stolen persimmon and pretending not to care about you. You pass the training yard, now empty. The wooden dummies still stand like sentinels catching moonlight on their cracked foreheads. A straw mat lies curled at the edge, forgotten. The wind picks it up and twirls it gently before laying it back down like a parent settling a child. Your steps carry you to the bamboo grove at the far edge of the property. And here, it happens. Voices, not loud, not secretive, just soft conversation drifting through the stalks. You approach quietly, not to eavesdrop, just to be near the sound of people unwinding after a long day. 3 samurai are seated around a low fire, pouring sake into ceramic cups that look older than your memory of childhood. One strums a shamisen with calloused fingers. Another whittles a bit of wood into something that might one day be a spoon. The third is just watching the flame's eyes flickering like he's seeing something far away. They glance up, nod. A 4th cup is poured, no questions asked. You sit, you sip. You let the warmth curl around your chest like the smoke curling into the trees. Here's your final mainstream historical fact. In the stillness between campaigns or assignments, samurai often shared these quiet, informal gatherings. They weren't just social, they were mental ballast. A way to reflect without the structure of ritual, and to connect without the weight of rank. Many oral histories, jokes, and unrecorded songs were born around such fires. The conversation drifts from weather to poetry to dreams. Someone talks about their first duel, not the outcome, but the feeling of the grass underfoot. Another wonders if the ancestors can see what their descendants are doing with their swords. The musician hums a song with no words. You recognise the tune. You don't know how. Now for your final fringe tidbit. There are accounts, fragmented, speculative, of samurai composing collaborative bedtime stories. Not for children, but for each other. A way to pass time during travel or guard shifts. Each warrior would add a line, a twist, a new character. Some tales became epic, some became ridiculous. One ended with a radish becoming shogun. As it should. Historians still argue whether these stories were cultural bonding tools, or just evidence that boredom is more powerful than Bushido. You contribute your own tale tonight, about a wandering merchant who discovers a map written in plum juice, and followed it only to find a garden that grew every flower, except the one he was seeking. They like it. Someone suggests it needs a sequel. You all laugh gently, and for a long while, no one says anything. The fire crackles, the bamboo sways. Chairman Spitz appears, glares at the cups, and settles beside you like a sack of judgment. You pet his neck absent-mindedly, because this is what it really means to rest as a samurai. Not grand gestures, not perfect form, but letting go of duty long enough to simply be, to share sake in silence, to sit beneath the moon, with others who've also seen too much and said too little, and still come back the next night. And in this hush of warmth and wood smoke, you finally feel still. The fire burns low now, just embers and breath. Around you the others have gone quiet, some leaning against trees, others curled in their cloaks, the rhythm of their sleep, soft as falling petals. Above the stars blink across the velvet sky, their silence deeper than the mountains, older than the road. You lie back on the cool earth, your fingers tucked under your head, your eyes heavy, but unwilling to close. Not yet. You think about the scrolls you copied, the dumplings, you balance the flute song drifting through the halls. You remember the sting of the wooden blade, the bite of cold sake, the laugh that slipped out of you before you could stop it. And you smile. The path of a samurai is not made only of swords and war, it's made of ink and tea and shared glances. It's held together with ribboned maps, secret songs and jokes scribbled in margins. It breathes in gardens and rests in moonlight. And in all its quiet, strange, deeply human ways, it continues, even now as your eyes begin to close and your body melts into the map beneath you. Even now as Chairman Spitz snores his crooked symphony beside your ear. Even now as your thoughts blur into dreams stitched from silk paper and wind. The story walks on, and you, my friend, you walk with it.